Hello, this is Andrew DeWint, Graduate Assistant for Geography 276, Urban and Regional Planning 276, and Geography 579 at Eastern Michigan University. In this ArcGIS tutorial today, we're going to look at elements of map design and how to make professional layouts using the data that we pulled together making these maps in ArcGIS. So if you're watching this a little bit through the class, this first part's going to be a little bit familiar because the first thing we need to do to share this map is to make a layout. What we're going to want to do is, a lot of times with these mapping projects, is take the map that we've made and then put it in a report somewhere as a practical application of what we're doing in ArcGIS, or just print off a big copy of the map so that somebody can visually look at it, or just display it as an image on the web. To do that, we need to get it into a format rather than this editing window that we have here in ArcGIS, but into a stable image. And we can do that by inserting a layout. Got all different options here. I'm just going to go with a letter, which is for this class perfectly fine. If your map is very tall, you might want to go with a portrait landscape, or in this case, our map is very wide, so we're going to go with a landscape layout. And this opens our layout menu. Again, if you're watching this partway through the class, then this looks a little bit familiar to you. We're going to go up to the map frame right here. And if we had more maps in the project, we'd have a bunch of maps in here. You might actually have to be able to scroll through this, but we just have our one map, which is called map. We're going to use that. Then we draw a box. We can draw it as big or as small as we like. For this tutorial, I'm going to make it really big. I'm going to make it take up the whole size here. And now you see if we move this around the map frame, we're just dragging the whole thing around on our layout. But we want to actually zoom in a little bit, make this data of historical sites in Detroit look a little bit bigger. So to do that, we're going to right click, we're going to activate the map. Now, if we click and drag, it's moving the map around within the map frame. If you want to zoom, you can use your scroll bar to do that, or for a little bit finer control, if you press the right button on your mouse and move the mouse up and down, that will allow you to zoom in and out with a lot more precision than if you're using the scroll wheel. You can also adjust the position here. We're going to want to make sure that we've got room for a title and other elements around the map, and also that we don't have parts of the map completely blocked off outside of the layout. So for this, that looks like a pretty good zoom level for this project. I'm just going to move the map down a little bit. Then I'm going to close out of this. You can either close out of this by going up here to this little X, which will close activation, or you can go up to layout here and you can close the activation from this menu. Now, if we drag this around, we're dragging the whole map frame. So this is our map, but if you were to print this off, it would not be very useful because you wouldn't be able to see what all these purple dots are and what the other shape files that we have in the project are. For that, we need things like a legend, which is this item right up here. We also would like to have a scale bar, which would show people distance in here. People may not be familiar with how big the city of Detroit is, so having a scale bar would be easy for them. Even if they are familiar, if you want to know how far apart things are on this map, that allows them to see that. Also, it's good practice to have a north arrow, indication of which way is north on the map, so people can get a sense of direction. All of these work in the same way in that we have a top half of the button, which we'll use the default in ArcGIS, or the bottom half of the button, which will open up a menu. So when we're making, for example, north arrows here, we want these to be usable. People can see them very easily, but we don't want them to be distracting. We don't want to have a map that looks cluttered. We want something that has an element of balance. And this is something where it helps to have a little bit of an artistic eye looking at things. For example, some of these fancier north arrows here, or some of the more solid ones like this, they are very nice, but they do draw the eye away from the map. We want people looking at the map rather than the north arrow. So I'm going to use this one right here. And to draw that on, we just click and drag a box about how big we want it. And there's our north arrow. We can make this smaller or bigger. I'm going to make it about this size right here. I'm just going to put this north arrow here for now. We're going to make this look nice in a little bit. We're also going to add a scale bar here. We have all of these different options. I think I'm just going to use this one. Again, you have options here for imperial or US customary, as we use in the United States, and the metric system. Depending on what your data is and who you're presenting it to, you may want to pick one or the other. But since I'm making a map for historical preservation, we tend to use customary units of measure, so I'm going to use that. And I'm just going to click and drag again. We'll make this look nice in a minute, but here we have our scale bar. Now you note that this scale bar, when I drew that, I just so happened to make it a nice even 10 miles long. But if you make this bigger, now it's 17 miles long. Make it shorter, it'll be only 5 miles, or perhaps even 2 miles. Generally, when you're making a scale bar, what you want to do is you want to have a nice round number. So rather than 2 miles, stretch it out to see if you can fit 5 miles in there, or perhaps 10 miles. Nope, that's 9 miles. We can make this a little bit bigger. There we go, 10 miles. When it was 9 miles is nice, but just make it 10 because that's an easier number for people to relate to. So we're going to put that down there for now, and then we're going to add a legend. Again, we have a bunch of different options. I just like to use the default one, and we'll let us draw this here. You'll see we've got a legend is made. It says legend in big bold letters here. It also has this text that has Michigan historical, and then these 3 dots means that there's not enough room to display the full name of the shapefile. You'll see actually that the names of the elements are the same as the names of our shapefiles over here. So we have Michigan _ historical _ mar _ clip, Detroit _ historic _ local _ designations _ HDC _ PDD, which we're going to want to change, because if you put this in a map, someone's going to see that. They're going to say, oh, Detroit _ historic. What is this mess that's obviously written for a computer to understand and not a person? So to do that, we can edit these things. Particularly for the legend, we're just going to right click on this, and we can have order here, but we actually want to, my mistake, we're going to want to right click on legend over here in the contents pane. And then we're going to look at the properties of that. This brings up the element pane over here, which is what we're going to use to edit the legend. It's kind of like symbology for the layers on the map. So we have the name here. We also have the title. Title is what will actually show up. So if we want to say, instead of legend, let's say we want this to be a key, if that's the terminology that we're going to use rather than a legend. If we type it, click it, it changes to key. Or we can also get creative down here. We can say that this is the city of Detroit, for example. This may not be the most appropriate thing for this particular map, but you can vary that. It depends on the needs of your project. This is a tutorial, so it's a sample. So I'm just going to leave this as a legend because that's what works best for this project. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change the names of these. We can't edit them directly in the elements pane. Instead, we're going to have to go over here, and we actually have to rename the shape files to do that. So if we change this one to, this is Michigan Historic Markers, the actual data set this comes from is State Historic Markers. We change that, and we can now see that it's changed over here in our legend as well. This is Detroit Local Historic Designations, so we're going to change that to City Historic Districts. And neighborhoods is perfectly fine because that's just one word that's easy for people to understand. We also can change the order of things. So for example, if we want neighborhoods to be on top of city historic districts in the legend, we can do that simply by moving them in the legend. If we click this and move that up here, you can see that rather than changing the order that they're displayed in on the map, where the neighborhood shapefile would move and completely block out the historic district shapefile, they're still there. They're just displayed in a different order in the legend. If we were to move that, say, here, now we can't see that shapefile anymore. Move that back. Generally, with this, it's still good practice to follow the practice that we use when making maps for the shapefiles, is that we want points on top of lines, on top of polygons, because that's the easiest to see. So we've got all of this here, and what we're going to do is move this down to the corner. I accidentally clicked there. That happens sometimes. You can just undo, and we're going to take the legend. Now we're just going to move the legend down here. Actually, this is a thematic map, which we're making. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go down here. I'm going to move my picture of myself, and we're going to take the topographic map and world hillshades for these two base maps. We're just going to untick the boxes to make them invisible so that now we have a little bit clearer view of the city of Detroit. And this right here, because we're emphasizing the data that we have rather than the area around it. Now we're going to zoom. I'm just going to zoom out here a little bit so I have a better view. And you can see that I made the map frame not the best. So right click, activate that. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, make that fit better. And then I'm going to close the activation. Now you see how I zoomed out a little bit in the map here, and that adjusted the scale bar. It's now 12 miles rather than 10 miles. So we have to make that back to a nice round number. Miles, 10 miles. We're going to put this down here is a pretty good place for that. And I'm going to put this north arrow right here as well. Sometimes it's a little bit picky because it snaps. If you zoom in, the snapping is a little bit easier to deal with. And now we have a legend down here. We have a scale bar, a north arrow. We have our map. And you'll notice that these elements right here, they're all close together and they're arranged so that we have balance. There's a lot of data up here on the map because, of course, the city of Detroit is a little bit bigger on the northwest side than it is on the southeast side. So we're going to put the legend in the north arrow down here to balance that out. If you had something that was a little bit different, you might arrange that differently. The idea is that there's no one part of the image that is busier, has more going on it than the other. The last thing that we need to do is we need to title the map. When you're making a title for a map, the title should always communicate what the map is showing. If you have just one shape file on here, then you would say, this is what this shape file is. But because we have multiple shape files, we're actually showing the relationship between these shape files. So in this case, we have state markers, we have city neighborhoods, and city historic districts. I'm actually going to change the order here because I want neighborhoods outside, because these two are of objects of the same type. They're both historic designations, so we want them next to each other in the legend. But what we want to do is we want the title to communicate that. So what this is going to do is this is a map that shows the relationship between historic designations in the city of Detroit and Detroit's neighborhoods. Which neighborhoods have a lot of things that are designated as historical, which neighborhoods don't have a whole lot. And we can communicate that through the title. So we're going to add the title up here. We can do that with this menu. And what we want is this one right here, straight text. We're going to draw a title. And so this is going to be historic designations in Detroit neighborhoods. And you notice that this is really, really big. We don't want it to be that big. So we're going to change options here. And in this element menu, now we're editing this text. If we go to this one, we'll be able to adjust where this text is. So if we want this centered in terms of where we grab it, we can do that. Or if we go to text symbol, this is where we can change the font size and also what font it is. For this, Tahoma is perfectly fine. If you're doing a project professionally or for a different class, there may actually be a style guide that will tell you which font size and which font you actually have to use. So for this one, though, we're just going to use Tahoma, and let's go down to, say, 22 point font. We're going to see what that looks like. That's pretty small. We want something that's a little bit bigger, so we're going to go up to maybe 36. How does that apply? That's pretty good. Again, this is part of, this is artistic. If we're looking at having a balanced design where things look nice and professional, and we have no area of the map being too busy, too much busier than the others. The last thing that I'm going to talk about in this tutorial, now that we've got this map, is we're going to look at the color scheme because ArcGIS, when you add a shapefile in it, picks some random color to make that shapefile. And sometimes we want things to have different colors. For example, in this case, we have blue neighborhoods, pink city designations, and purple state markers. If we want to have something that is a little bit different and a little bit more eye-catching, we can actually change that by changing the symbology. So if we go to state markers here, for example, we want to open the symbology tab. In the state of Michigan, the state markers are these big green plaques. And so to kind of tie that in and make that more thematically apparent, we're actually going to change this to be green dots that match the marker. We're going to go with, that's a nice green color. Say that we want the areas with the city designations to pop out a little bit more. So we're going to change that to a different color as well. We're going to change this one to, say, an orange color. Let's see, that stands out a little bit more. We have a higher contrast rather than the light pink that it was before. And we're going to just leave the city this color for now. One other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing this is that when you're making maps, particularly for a larger audience, it's good practice to make things that are colorblind accessible. And we can do that by going up to the imagery tab right here, or the view tab, excuse me. And we have this button right here, the color vision simulator. If you're making maps for, in general, for a much wider audience, you want to make sure that people who have some form of color blindness to be able to see them. So if we click on this, this toggles it on in general on the top. The bottom half lets you pick from the 3 most common forms of color blindness. And this will actually show you now what your map looks like for someone who has colorblind vision. And you can see here that we have a lower contrast in color between the points that are green and the city historic districts, which are yellow. They both look this sort of shade of mustard brown, which in this case is not too bad because we have that nice bold border around those points. But if we had 2 different shape files here, we would want to change the color of one of them so that they would be easier to tell the difference. So then we can also go up here. Let's go to the second one on this menu. About the same. Again, the points and the lines here are different, but again, we've got that black border around each point, so it's not too bad. Then let's go to our third option. You can see that we have perfectly good contrast between those here. So we're going to just toggle this off now. And I am just to show you what it looks like to do this a little bit more thoroughly. We're going to make this a little bit brighter shade of green. Apply. Now we do this. And that's still about the same. That's actually a little bit worse. We're just going to play around with this. And now, if we look at that, that's a much better contrast. So we're just going to run through that one, and that's good. Turn that off, and now it's perfectly apparent. So that's a little bit about map design and making a layout in ArcGIS Pro. Of course, once you're done, you want to be able to share this. So you just go up to the Share tab, and you export the layout. Export it in Web JPEG is perfectly fine for this class. This is where you would say where it's going to be exported to on your computer. You can pick a file from here, give it a name. So I'm just going to go to this folder is perfectly fine because it's in the project folder. I'm just going to name this to tutorial layout. It's JPEG. We're going to hit OK. You can change the resolution to make it a little bit better. If you're making a really nice professional map, 600 dpi is pretty good for most projects. For this class, the default setting of 300 is perfectly fine. Then we just click export. Takes a moment, view the exported file, and there's our map that we've made. So that's a little bit about making layouts in ArcGIS Pro, how to arrange them and have a nice balance of things in the map so that we have a professional looking layout in ArcGIS.